Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves come from documented investigations, court records, and witness statements. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, settle in. Let your breathing slow. Let the tension of the day fade away. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. If you find yourself coming back for these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a town built around convenience. Everything people needed was close by: shops, schools, offices, and walking paths that connected neighborhoods like quiet arteries. People felt safe here. Familiar faces passed each other every day. That sense of familiarity was exactly what allowed something dark to exist unnoticed for so long. The first warning sign came in the form of a complaint that went nowhere. A woman reported that someone had been inside her house while she was away. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was broken. But she was certain something had changed. A chair was angled differently. A cupboard door was left slightly open. Police told her it was likely stress or forgetfulness. Weeks later, another resident reported something similar. Then another. Each time, officers found no signs of forced entry. Doors and windows were intact. No alarms were triggered. The reports were logged and quietly dismissed. Then someone went missing. The victim was a man in his early 40s who lived alone and worked predictable hours. He was last seen walking home from a grocery store less than a mile from his house. His groceries were later found in his kitchen, partially unpacked. The front door was locked. His phone and wallet were gone. There was no evidence of a struggle. Police initially believed he had left voluntarily, but friends insisted that didn't make sense. He had plans. He had responsibilities. He wouldn't just disappear. 2 months later, a woman living alone vanished under nearly identical circumstances. This time, investigators paid closer attention. Her home also showed subtle signs of disturbance. Nothing obvious, just small inconsistencies. A window unlatched. A light left on in a room she never used. As detectives dug deeper, they noticed that all reported incidents and disappearances occurred within a specific area connected by pedestrian paths and service alleys. These paths were rarely monitored and used mostly by locals who felt comfortable walking them at all hours. Attention turned to a man who worked as a delivery and maintenance contractor in the area. He was known by many residents, often seen carrying tools or packages. He had access codes, keys, and a reason to be present in and around homes. People trusted him because he looked like he belonged. When police searched his vehicle, they found notebooks filled with dates, addresses, and observations. Notes like alone, returns late, and no visitors. Some entries were marked complete. Others were circled. A search of a rented storage unit revealed personal belongings from multiple missing people. Shoes, bags, identification cards. Items that held no monetary value but deep personal significance. Everything was carefully organized. Investigators soon realized the reports of someone being inside homes without stealing anything were part of the same pattern. He had been entering houses just to observe, to learn routines, to test access points. Sometimes he stayed only minutes. Other times, hours. He moved silently, carefully, leaving as little evidence as possible. Another disturbing detail emerged when police reviewed years of overlooked security footage. In several cases, a figure could be seen walking behind residents on the paths late at night, always keeping distance, always slowing or stopping when they did. He followed patterns, not people, waiting for the moment when predictability made intervention easy. A separate case uncovered during the investigation involved a woman who had narrowly avoided becoming a victim. She returned home unexpectedly one afternoon and found her bathroom light on. She was certain she had turned it off. As she stood in the hallway, she heard a soft sound, like fabric brushing against a wall. She left immediately and called police. The intruder escaped through a back door. Her report helped investigators narrow their timeline. As more evidence came to light, authorities realized the crimes extended beyond the town. Similar disappearances had occurred in neighboring areas with the same pedestrian infrastructure, the same kind of access, the same sense of safety. During interrogation, the man admitted that he preferred places where people felt comfortable, where they moved without thinking. He said routines made everything easier. He didn't rush. He waited. He relied on people dismissing small signs because acknowledging them felt inconvenient or embarrassing. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the case was how many people had interacted with him. He had been inside dozens of homes. He had been trusted, welcomed, thanked. His presence had never raised alarms because it matched expectations. In the aftermath, residents struggled with a new awareness. They questioned memories, sounds they had ignored, moments they had brushed aside. The town installed new lighting, new cameras, new locks. But what changed most was how people listened to their instincts. This story, like so many others in true crime, is not just about what happened, but about how it was allowed to happen. About how familiarity can become a blind spot. About how danger doesn't always force its way in, it often waits to be invited through assumption and routine. True crime reminds us that awareness is not fear. It's attention. It's listening to small discomforts before they become something larger. It's understanding that safety is not guaranteed by familiarity alone. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, tell me where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware.
Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations, court records, and witness testimony. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let your breathing slow and your body relax. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a place designed for short stays. A roadside motel just off a major highway. The kind of place people stop at without thinking, travelers passing through, truck drivers resting for the night, families breaking up long drives. Rooms turned over quickly. Guests came and went, often without learning each other's names. For years, nothing unusual was reported. Then a woman failed to arrive at her destination. She had checked into the motel late at night and sent a message saying she was tired and would continue driving in the morning. That message was the last anyone heard from her. When police contacted the motel, staff said she had checked out early. There was no reason to question it. Months later, another guest vanished after staying at the same motel. Then another. Each case occurred weeks or months apart, in different seasons, involving people from different places. The disappearances were handled by different jurisdictions, and no one initially connected them. The first clue came from an employee who had worked at the motel for several years. He mentioned that a certain room was requested unusually often, even when other rooms were available. Guests staying in that room frequently checked out early or left belongings behind. Sometimes, staff would find personal items in the trash that didn't seem like things people would willingly discard. Investigators reviewed booking records and noticed a pattern. The same employee was often working the desk when those guests checked in. He was described by co-workers as quiet, reliable, and helpful. Guests trusted him because he handled everything calmly and efficiently. He knew which travelers were alone, which rooms were isolated, and which security cameras didn't work properly. When police reviewed old surveillance footage, they noticed something unsettling. On several nights tied to disappearances, the employee could be seen walking toward guest rooms long after his shift ended. Sometimes he carried linens. Sometimes nothing at all. The footage was grainy, incomplete, and often overwritten before it could be reviewed in detail. A search of the motel uncovered a hidden maintenance corridor behind several rooms. It allowed access without passing through public areas. Inside one of the storage spaces connected to the corridor, investigators found items belonging to missing guests. Phones, identification cards, clothing. Each item had been cleaned carefully. As the investigation widened, police discovered similar cases connected to other motels along the same highway. In each instance, the suspect had worked temporarily or filled in for short periods. He moved frequently, staying just long enough to learn routines and vulnerabilities before relocating. Because motels are designed for anonymity, his presence never stood out. Another disturbing detail emerged when detectives interviewed survivors. A man recalled waking briefly in the night to someone standing near the door, assuming it was staff responding to a noise complaint. A woman remembered being offered help carrying luggage to her room, then feeling uncomfortable when the employee lingered too long. At the time, neither thought it was worth reporting. The suspect's method relied on exhaustion and trust. Travelers were tired, disoriented, far from home. They didn't question authority in a uniform. They didn't want trouble. He counted on that hesitation. In one narrowly avoided case, a guest became suspicious after noticing the employee outside her room more than once. She locked the door and placed a chair against it. In the morning, she found scratch marks near the lock. Her report helped confirm the timeline investigators were building. When the suspect was finally arrested, authorities uncovered journals documenting years of movement. Highway exits, motel names, room numbers, notes about which properties had blind spots or minimal staffing overnight. He didn't view his actions as impulsive. He described them as planned, deliberate, and quiet. Perhaps the most unsettling part of this story is how invisible it all was. Motels are transitional spaces. People don't linger. Staff turnover is high. Guests rarely speak to one another. It was the perfect environment for something terrible to hide in plain sight. These crimes didn't occur in places people consider dangerous. They happened in ordinary rooms with locked doors and flickering lamps. Places meant to feel temporary and safe. The danger wasn't loud. It didn't rush. It waited patiently in routine and anonymity. True crime often shows us that safety is not guaranteed by familiarity or convenience. That trust, when combined with exhaustion and isolation, can be exploited. And that listening to discomfort, even when it feels inconvenient, can matter. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves come from documented investigations, court records, and witness accounts. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let your breathing slow. Let the noise of the day fade into the background. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a place people rarely think twice about, a public library. It was a large, modern building with quiet reading rooms, computer stations, and long rows of shelves. Students, retirees, and families passed through every day. People came to feel safe, anonymous, and undisturbed. For years, nothing seemed out of place. Then a woman who visited the library several times a week stopped coming. Staff assumed she had changed her routine. A few months later, another regular patron vanished. Then another. None of them were connected. Different ages. Different backgrounds. Different lives. The connection wasn't discovered until a librarian mentioned something odd during a routine meeting. She said she often saw the same man assisting people in the back areas of the building. He didn't work there, but he always appeared to be helping, guiding patrons to shelves, assisting with printers, offering directions. He blended in so well that no one questioned him. Security footage revealed the man entering the building almost daily. He stayed for hours. He never checked out books. He spent most of his time observing, watching who arrived alone, who stayed late, who used secluded study rooms or corners far from staff desks. When police reviewed footage from the days the missing patrons were last seen, they noticed the same pattern. The man would follow at a distance. He never rushed. He waited for moments when people stood up, gathered their things, and walked toward exits or restrooms. He always kept enough distance to appear coincidental. Investigators later learned that several patrons had reported uncomfortable interactions over the years. Someone standing too close. Someone asking personal questions. Someone offering help that felt unnecessary. Each complaint had been dismissed as harmless or misunderstood. A break in the case came when a college student trusted her instincts. She noticed the same man appearing near her every time she visited the library. Different clothes. Same posture. Same calm stare. One evening, she left abruptly and reported the behavior. Her description matched the person seen in footage tied to multiple disappearances. Police identified him as a former security contractor who had worked in public buildings years earlier. He knew layouts, blind spots, exit routes. He knew how to move through spaces without drawing attention. He had no official access anymore, but he didn't need it. A search of a storage unit connected to him revealed personal items belonging to multiple missing individuals. Library cards, notebooks, bags, items taken not for value, but as confirmation. He had documented dates, times, and locations in careful handwriting. As the investigation expanded, detectives discovered that some victims had been followed beyond the library. He learned routines. which bus they took, which direction they walked. He preferred places where people felt invisible but secure, where no one questioned quiet behavior. Another disturbing detail emerged from interviews with witnesses. Several people recalled seeing the man reading quietly in the same spot for hours, never turning a page. He wasn't there to read. He was there to watch. Perhaps the most unsettling part of this story is how many chances there were to stop it earlier. Small discomforts ignored. Patterns overlooked. Familiarity mistaken for safety. The library remained open and welcoming, even as something dark passed silently through it. These crimes didn't happen in abandoned places or dangerous neighborhoods. They happened in a public space meant for peace and learning. A place where silence was expected, and attention was low. True crime reminds us that danger doesn't always interrupt. Sometimes it blends in. Sometimes it sits quietly nearby, waiting for routine to do the work for it. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, tell me where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations, court records, and witness testimony. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, settle in. Let your shoulders drop. Let your breathing slow. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a place designed to feel safe through routine, a commuter train line that ran through several quiet suburbs and into the city. Every morning and evening, the same faces appeared on the platforms. People stood in the same spots, sat in the same seats. Over time, strangers became familiar silhouettes. That familiarity created comfort and invisibility. The first incident was so subtle it barely registered. A woman reported that someone had brushed against her on the train and whispered something she couldn't quite hear. She assumed it was an accident. Trains were crowded. People were tired. She forgot about it. Weeks later, another commuter reported something similar. Then another. Each described a man who stood too close, who followed them through the station without speaking, who always seemed to disappear before anyone could point him out. Because nothing overt happened, reports were minimal and unconnected. Then one commuter didn't come home. She was a young professional who took the same train every evening. Her partner reported her missing when she didn't answer calls or arrive home. Security footage showed her exiting the train and walking toward the parking structure. She was never seen again. Police initially suspected an isolated incident. But when another commuter vanished months later under similar circumstances, investigators began reviewing transit footage more closely. They noticed the same man appearing repeatedly on different days, always standing near the edge of platforms, always boarding the same cars, always exiting at different stops. He had learned how to move with the flow. He positioned himself where people expected others to stand. He timed his movements to avoid cameras or blend into crowds. He never rushed. He waited. Transit police interviewed dozens of commuters and discovered something unsettling. Many people remembered him once they were shown images. They described him as forgettable. Average height. Neutral expression. Someone you wouldn't look at twice. Several recalled moments of discomfort but dismissed them because nothing technically happened. Further investigation revealed that the man had been riding the trains for years without a clear destination. He tracked routines. Who walked alone? Who parked far from entrances? Who used stairwells instead of elevators? He noted which stations were poorly lit at night and which security cameras were often broken. A breakthrough came when a commuter reported a near encounter. She noticed the man following her through the station and into the parking structure. When she stopped suddenly and turned around, he stopped too. When she pretended to make a phone call and changed direction, he mirrored her movements. She approached a security booth and stayed there until he left. Her report provided a detailed description that matched the suspect. Police searched his residence and found transit maps covered in handwritten notes. Times circled. Stations marked. Exit routes highlighted. He had documented patterns with disturbing precision. They also found personal items belonging to multiple missing commuters, items taken not for financial gain, but as proof. As the case unfolded, detectives realized how the environment itself had helped him. Trains are liminal spaces. People are distracted. Headphones in. Eyes down. Everyone assumes someone else is paying attention. The suspect relied on that shared detachment. In interviews, he described his approach as patient. He said he preferred places where people were mentally elsewhere, where routines ran on autopilot. He never forced situations. He waited for predictability to open doors. The aftermath changed the commute forever for many residents. Platforms were redesigned. Lighting improved. Security increased. But the biggest shift was psychological. People began looking up, making eye contact, trusting discomfort instead of dismissing it. This story is unsettling not because it involves unfamiliar danger, but because it took place in the most ordinary moments of daily life. Standing on a platform, waiting for a train, walking to a car. Moments repeated thousands of times without incident, until one day, they weren't. True crime reminds us that awareness doesn't mean living in fear. It means staying present. It means recognizing patterns. It means understanding that safety can erode quietly when routine becomes automatic. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, tell me where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations, court records, and witness accounts. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let the noise of the day fade. Let your breathing slow. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a place people rarely think of as dangerous, a quiet medical office building that closed promptly at 5 o'clock every evening. During the day, it was busy and well lit, filled with patients, staff, and the low hum of routine care. At night, it became something else entirely, silent hallways, locked offices, and long stretches of emptiness broken only by the occasional cleaning crew. For years, nothing unusual was reported. Then a receptionist at a dental practice noticed something strange. Files on her desk had been moved after hours. Not taken. Just rearranged. She assumed the cleaning staff had bumped them. She mentioned it casually, and everyone laughed it off. A few weeks later, a therapist working late heard footsteps outside her office long after the building had closed. She opened the door and saw no one. The security desk told her it was probably an HVAC technician or a cleaner running behind. She believed them. Then a medical billing clerk failed to show up for work. She was reliable, quiet, and lived alone. When she didn't answer calls, police were asked to perform a welfare check. Her apartment was locked from the inside. Nothing appeared disturbed. Her phone was on the nightstand. Her car was parked in its usual spot. There were no signs of forced entry. At first, investigators suspected a personal issue. Maybe she had left town. Maybe she needed time away. But friends insisted that didn't fit. She had been excited about an upcoming trip. She had plans. Months passed. Then another employee from the same building disappeared. This time, it was a night janitor who worked alone after hours. His co-workers assumed he had quit without notice. It wasn't until his family reported him missing that police realized the connection. Detectives began examining the building more closely. They reviewed security footage, which revealed long stretches of time with no recorded activity. Cameras covered entrances and main corridors, but many interior hallways and offices were not monitored. Anyone familiar with the layout could move through the building unseen. Attention turned to a man who worked as a contracted security guard. He wasn't assigned to the building full-time, but he filled in regularly during overnight shifts. Staff described him as polite, quiet, and professional. He wore the uniform. He followed procedures. He blended in. Access logs showed that his key card had been used at unusual hours, often long after his shifts officially ended. When questioned, he explained that he stayed late to finish reports or conduct extra patrols. At first, his answers seemed reasonable. But investigators noticed something unsettling in the footage they did have. On several nights connected to the disappearances, he could be seen entering the building hours before his shift and leaving well after. Sometimes he carried nothing. Sometimes he carried a small bag. He always moved calmly, never rushing. Police searched his vehicle and found notebooks filled with dates, times, and names. Some were crossed out. Others were circled. Many belonged to people who worked in or frequently visited the building. He had noted routines: who stayed late, who worked alone, who took which stairwell. A search of a storage unit rented in his name revealed personal belongings from multiple victims. Identification badges. Prescription bottles. Watches. Items taken not for money, but for possession. For proof. As the investigation expanded, detectives uncovered earlier complaints that had never been connected. A nurse practitioner recalled finding her office door unlocked when she was certain she had locked it. A patient remembered seeing a security guard inside a restricted hallway where he shouldn't have been. A cleaner once reported someone standing silently at the end of a corridor, watching her work, then walking away without speaking. Perhaps the most disturbing discovery came when police examined the building's ceiling access points. Above several offices, panels had been removed and replaced. Inside the crawl spaces, investigators found evidence that someone had been moving through them, dust disturbed, insulation compressed, small personal items dropped accidentally and left behind. He had been watching from above. The suspect admitted during questioning that he preferred places like the medical building. He said people trusted uniforms. They assumed authority. They didn't want to question someone who appeared to belong. He relied on that hesitation. He also admitted that he spent months observing before acting. He learned schedules. Learned which doors were rarely used. Learned which lights were left on late. He described the building as quiet, predictable, and forgiving of small irregularities. In one narrowly avoided case, a staff member arrived early for an appointment and noticed someone exiting her office. When she asked what he was doing, he calmly told her he was responding to an alarm. There had been no alarm. She believed him anyway. It wasn't until much later that she realized how close she had come. As news spread, former employees began sharing experiences they had dismissed at the time. Sounds in empty hallways. The feeling of being watched. The sense that someone had been inside their office without permission. All of it made sense now. The case revealed how environments built on routine and trust can become dangerous when oversight is limited. Medical buildings, like many professional spaces, are designed to feel controlled and safe. But that sense of security can hide blind spots, literal and psychological. In the aftermath, policies changed. Access was restricted. Cameras were added. Contractors were monitored more closely. But for many, the damage was already done. People struggled to return to work without replaying memories of quiet hallways and flickering lights. This story is unsettling because it didn't unfold in darkness or isolation. It happened in a place associated with care, professionalism, and order. It happened quietly, patiently, and over time. True crime often reminds us that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wears a uniform. Sometimes it follows the rules just enough to avoid attention. Sometimes it waits in silence, counting on routine to do the rest. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations, court records, and witness accounts. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, settle in. Let your body relax. Let the background noise fade. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a place people associate with rest and routine, a long-term care facility on the edge of a small town. It wasn't a hospital, but it wasn't quite a home either. Residents lived there for months or years, supported by rotating staff, visiting family members, and a strict daily schedule that rarely changed. The facility had a good reputation. Families trusted it. Inspections were always passed. Staff turnover was low. Nothing about the building or its employees raised concern, until subtle inconsistencies began to appear. It started with medication discrepancies. Small ones. A pill missing here. A dosage logged at a time when the patient was asleep. Nurses assumed it was a paperwork issue. Charts were corrected and life moved on. Then a resident died unexpectedly. He was elderly, but stable. His condition hadn't changed in months. His death was attributed to natural causes. The family was saddened but not suspicious. Within weeks, another resident passed away under similar circumstances. Then another. Each death on its own made sense. But a nurse who had worked night shifts for years began to feel uneasy. She noticed that the deaths often occurred during the same overnight hours. Always quiet. Always calm. No alarms. No emergencies. She reported her concerns to management. They reviewed records and found nothing conclusive. The facility continued operating as usual. Months later, a resident was found unresponsive but survived after being rushed to a hospital. Blood tests revealed medication levels far higher than prescribed. The explanation was unclear. The doctor assumed a mistake had been made. The resident couldn't communicate clearly enough to explain what had happened. That incident changed everything. Authorities began a quiet investigation. They reviewed staff schedules, medication logs, and security footage. One name appeared repeatedly: a senior caregiver who worked mostly overnight shifts. He was known as dependable, calm, someone who volunteered for extra hours. Families praised him for being attentive. Security footage showed him entering rooms without logging visits. Sometimes he stayed longer than necessary. Sometimes he stood beside beds without performing any obvious tasks. Always quiet. Always unhurried. Investigators discovered that he had access to medication storage and understood dosage systems better than most. He knew which residents had no visitors, which families lived far away, which patients wouldn't be able to describe what they felt. When police searched his locker and vehicle, they found handwritten notes, room numbers, names, times, observations about sleep patterns and medical conditions. Some names were crossed out, others circled. Former staff members were interviewed again. This time, they shared things they had dismissed before. The caregiver spending too long in darkened rooms. The way he insisted on handling certain residents alone. How he discouraged family visits late at night, claiming residents needed rest. One nurse remembered catching him sitting silently beside a patient who was already asleep. When asked what he was doing, he said he was keeping them company. She didn't question it at the time. As investigators connected the timeline, it became clear that his actions had gone unnoticed because they blended into caregiving routines. In a place where people expect vulnerability, dependence, and quiet, small deviations didn't stand out. During questioning, he admitted that he preferred environments where people were already fragile, where death wasn't unexpected, where authority figures were trusted without question. He described the facility as predictable, controlled, safe from scrutiny. The revelation devastated families and staff alike. People replayed memories, wondering how many signs they had missed. How often kindness had been mistaken for care. How trust had been exploited. The facility implemented immediate changes. Medication controls were tightened. Overnight staffing increased. Cameras were installed in hallways. But the sense of violation lingered long after. This story is disturbing not because it involved chaos or violence, but because it unfolded quietly, behind closed doors, in a place built on trust and compassion. It reminds us that danger doesn't always look threatening. Sometimes it looks responsible. Sometimes it looks helpful. True crime teaches us that awareness matters, even in places we assume are safe by design. That trust should never replace oversight. And that listening to quiet discomfort can make a difference. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, tell me where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and identifying details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations, court records, and witness statements. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let your breathing even out. Let the outside world grow distant. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I always enjoy reading them. If you enjoy these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a place associated with safety and routine, a small neighborhood gym that stayed open 24 hours a day. It wasn't a large facility. Just a few workout rooms, lockers, showers, and a front desk that was often unattended late at night. Members used key cards to enter, and most people visited at the same times every week. For years, nothing seemed unusual. Then a woman reported that her locker had been opened while she was showering. Nothing was missing. She assumed she had forgotten to lock it. A few weeks later, another member complained that someone had been inside the locker room while it was supposed to be empty. The complaint was noted, but no action was taken. Then a regular stopped coming. He was a man in his late 20s who worked early mornings and exercised late at night. Staff noticed his absence but assumed he had changed gyms. Months later, a woman who also frequented the gym during overnight hours vanished. Her car was found in the parking lot. Her gym bag was inside. She had never checked out. Police initially treated the cases separately, but when they reviewed access logs, a pattern emerged. A single key card appeared repeatedly during overnight hours, often entering shortly before or after the missing members. The card belonged to a man who had been a member for years. He was familiar to staff. Quiet, polite, someone who kept to himself. He often offered to help new members understand the equipment. No one found him strange. Security footage revealed that he spent long stretches of time sitting in common areas, not exercising. He watched people come and go. He learned routines. He learned who came alone and who stayed late. He also learned which cameras didn't fully cover locker room entrances. Investigators later discovered he had tampered with a maintenance door leading to a utility hallway that connected several areas of the gym. It allowed movement without being seen from the main floor. In that hallway, police found personal items belonging to multiple missing members, keys, earbuds, identification cards. Former members began coming forward once the investigation became public. Several described uncomfortable encounters they had dismissed at the time. Someone standing too close in empty rooms. Someone watching from mirrors. Someone offering help that felt unnecessary but harmless. One survivor described noticing the same man sitting in his car every time she left the gym at night. When she changed her schedule, he disappeared. Her account helped confirm that the suspect followed patterns, not people, waiting for predictability to create opportunity. When questioned, the man admitted that he preferred places open overnight. He said people were tired, distracted, and assumed no one else was paying attention. He relied on that shared exhaustion. He described the gym as quiet, controlled, and forgiving of small irregularities. The most unsettling detail was how many signs had been present without being connected. Logs reviewed but not analyzed. Complaints filed but not escalated. Cameras installed but not monitored consistently. Everything worked just well enough to create a false sense of security. After the arrests, the gym closed temporarily. Access systems were replaced. Overnight hours were eliminated. But for many members, the damage was already done. A place once associated with routine and self-care now carried an undercurrent of unease. This story is disturbing because it unfolded in a place people visited to feel better, stronger, and safer. It didn't rely on chaos or force. It relied on routine, familiarity, and silence. True crime reminds us that danger doesn't always interrupt. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it blends in. And sometimes it hides in places we trust the most. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware.
Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and minor details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations, witness accounts, and court records. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let your breathing slow and your body relax. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoy true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a neighborhood that had once been lively but had grown quiet over the years. Houses were neat, lawns trimmed, and sidewalks mostly empty. The kind of place where people trusted their neighbors without question. But one family who had recently moved in noticed something strange almost immediately. At night, they would hear footsteps in the attic. Faint, almost deliberate, moving slowly across the boards above them. At first, they assumed it was animals, mice or raccoons. But the sounds persisted, and sometimes, small objects in the house seemed to shift ever so slightly when no one was there. One evening, the mother of the family was woken by a soft knocking coming from inside the walls. She pressed her ear against the plaster and could hear whispers, though she couldn't make out the words. Heart pounding, she woke her husband, and together they searched the house. They found nothing unusual. The next day, a neighbor mentioned that a man had moved into the house next door months earlier, a quiet man who was rarely seen but always polite. He had delivered packages and helped with small yard projects, blending perfectly into the neighborhood. Weeks later, police were called to a nearby town after a woman disappeared from her home. There were no signs of forced entry. No witnesses. No struggle. The only clue was a faint set of fingerprints on a windowsill, previously overlooked because they seemed ordinary. Investigators began to notice a pattern. Similar disappearances had occurred in suburban areas across multiple counties, each involving someone who lived alone and was last seen at home in the evening. The connection became clearer when a young man reported seeing the same quiet neighbor standing in a vacant lot late at night, holding what appeared to be blueprints. When officers checked his residence, they found meticulously organized files, schedules, maps of neighborhoods, notes on houses, routines of residents. Some pages had detailed sketches of floor plans, marking windows, doors, and likely hiding spots. The man had been planning for years, studying behaviors, learning who lived alone, who left at predictable times, and who was unlikely to have visitors. Inside a hidden room behind a false wall in his basement, investigators found evidence of multiple crimes. Belongings from victims, jewelry, clothing, photographs, personal items, each catalogued and labeled. Some victims had been monitored for weeks before any direct interaction occurred. He kept recordings and notes of their routines, documenting every movement, every habit, every predictable behavior. Another chilling case connected to this investigation involved a young college student who had reported being followed on campus. A man in casual clothing would appear at the library, in the cafeteria, sometimes observing from a distance. She mentioned it to campus security, who initially dismissed it as coincidence. Later, footage from surveillance cameras captured him moving across campus in patterns that aligned with missing persons cases, appearing where he wasn't supposed to be, always quiet, always unnoticed until the damage had been done. The psychological profile of the suspect revealed a disturbing pattern. He derived satisfaction from control, not just from the act of harming. He observed, waited, and exploited assumptions. He relied on the predictable behaviors of his victims and the inattentiveness of communities. He didn't need force, he relied on trust, routine, and the idea that people rarely question what seems ordinary. Further investigation uncovered additional victims across nearby towns, each case showing the same methodical approach. In one instance, a woman narrowly escaped because she noticed footprints in the garden, footprints that did not belong to her family. She called the police immediately, an instinct that may have saved her life. In another, a man noticed his neighbor's cat behaving strangely, following shadows or growling at empty spaces. That animal's behavior led to the discovery of hidden cameras in a nearby shed, equipment used to monitor multiple homes over time. Perhaps the most unsettling detail is how ordinary the perpetrator appeared. He attended community events, helped neighbors with small tasks, and smiled politely at anyone who crossed his path. No one suspected him, because he looked normal, because he acted normal, because he blended in perfectly. The crimes didn't happen in dark alleys or abandoned places. They occurred in quiet homes, in neighborhoods people considered safe, in spaces where trust was assumed. The danger was patient, methodical, and calm, hidden behind polite manners and ordinary appearances. True crime reminds us that awareness is a quiet but powerful tool. That instincts, even when subtle, can be life-saving. That ordinary routines can be exploited by those who observe and wait. And that sometimes, danger is less about chaos and more about the quiet patience of someone who hides in plain sight. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly and continuously. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Some names, locations, and minor details have been changed to protect privacy, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations, court records, and witness accounts. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, get comfortable. Let your breathing slow and your body relax. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I love seeing how far these stories travel. If you enjoy true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins in a quiet suburban town, the kind of place where neighbors leave their doors unlocked and people wave to strangers without thinking. At first, it seemed like a perfect place to settle down. But beneath the surface, a quiet predator had been watching for years, unnoticed by everyone around him. The first victims were elderly residents living alone. They were considered private, independent, and safe. When one went missing, neighbors assumed they had gone to visit relatives or had been hospitalized. Weeks later, another elderly resident disappeared under similar circumstances. The pattern went unnoticed because the disappearances were far apart and involved people who lived solitary lives. It wasn't until a young woman reported a strange encounter that authorities began to connect the dots. She had been walking her dog at night when a man appeared from the shadows. He smiled, waving as if he belonged there. She felt a chill run down her spine and quickly walked home, locking the door behind her. The description she gave matched several reports that had been filed quietly over the years. Investigators discovered that the man had been living a double life. By day, he worked at a local hardware store and volunteered at community events. By night, he tracked residents' routines, noting who left for work, who went shopping, and who was home alone. He had detailed notebooks filled with observations, phone numbers, addresses, and even diagrams of homes and surrounding streets. When authorities searched his home, they found evidence of long-term planning. Items belonging to multiple victims were carefully stored: personal identification, clothing, and photographs, each labeled with dates and locations. What made the case chilling was not just the crimes themselves, but the patience and precision with which they were carried out. He had no impulsive tendencies. He waited, observed, and struck only when the opportunity was safest for him. Another layer to the investigation revealed that he had installed hidden cameras and listening devices in homes he had entered. Some victims were monitored for weeks before any harm came to them. Investigators concluded that he enjoyed the control and fear itself, not simply the possession of belongings or other material things. A related case surfaced in a nearby town, where a college student reported being followed home after classes. She noticed the same car parked on multiple streets, the same figure appearing in alleys and near crosswalks. She reported it to campus security, and officers traced the vehicle back to the same man. It became clear that he didn't limit himself to one neighborhood. He moved quietly from place to place, choosing victims whose routines he could predict and who were least likely to raise alarm quickly. During his trial, the psychological evaluation revealed a chilling insight. He did not see his victims as people. He saw them as objects, as moving pieces in a game he controlled. What made him most dangerous was his ability to blend in, to appear normal, and to exploit the assumptions of trust that communities naturally extend to familiar faces. This case is a reminder that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it helps. Sometimes it lives quietly next door, attending the same events, waving politely, waiting for moments of opportunity. True crime often teaches us to trust our instincts, to pay attention to subtle signs, and to understand that routine and familiarity can sometimes be exploited. Awareness, vigilance, and intuition are our strongest protections. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, tell me where you're watching from tonight, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware. Hello, and welcome back. Before we begin, I want to gently remind you that the story you're about to hear is based on real crimes involving real people. Certain names, locations, and identifying details have been changed, but the events themselves are drawn from documented investigations, witness statements, and court records. This story is meant to be listened to slowly and quietly. If disturbing content affects you, it's okay to stop listening now. For everyone else, settle in. Let the world outside fade away. And as you listen, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I read every one. If you enjoy these true crime stories for sleep, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. This story begins with a stretch of highway that locals avoided after dark. Not because it was dangerous in an obvious way, but because it felt wrong. The road cut through long miles of forest and farmland, with few lights and even fewer buildings. People used it every day, but at night, it became quiet in a way that felt unnatural. The first person disappeared after their car broke down along that road. A passing driver reported seeing the vehicle pulled onto the shoulder with its hazard lights on. By morning, the car was still there, but the driver was gone. Police assumed they had accepted a ride and left the area voluntarily. Weeks later, another car was found abandoned only a few miles away. Then another. Each time, the scene was the same. No signs of a struggle. Doors closed. Personal belongings still inside. The disappearances were spread out over months, and because the victims came from different towns, the cases weren't immediately connected. The pattern began to emerge when a tow truck operator mentioned something strange. He recalled seeing the same pickup truck parked nearby during 2 separate recoveries. The driver never approached. He just sat there with his headlights off, watching. Investigators began reviewing old traffic footage and found the pickup appearing again and again near the times vehicles were abandoned. It belonged to a man who lived less than 10 minutes from the highway. He worked as a roadside assistance contractor and frequently responded to breakdowns in that area. He had tools, a uniform, and a reason to stop. When questioned, he explained that he often pulled over to help stranded drivers. He said it was part of being a decent person. Many people remembered him. Some even described him as kind. A search of his property revealed something far more disturbing. Hidden behind a locked shed were personal items belonging to multiple missing people. Shoes, jackets, phones wrapped carefully in plastic. Each item was labeled with a date and a location. Investigators realized he didn't see the victims as people, but as moments in time. As police dug deeper, they uncovered reports that had been dismissed for years. Drivers who said a man had offered help but made them uncomfortable. People who noticed their cars were touched or moved when they returned from rest stops. Each report alone seemed minor. Together, they told a story of escalation. Another case tied into the investigation involved a woman who survived an encounter on that same highway. Her car overheated late at night. The pickup pulled over within minutes. The man offered to drive her to a gas station. Something in his tone made her hesitate. Instead, she pretended to call a friend and said help was already on the way. The man left immediately. She later learned how close she had come. In a separate but related discovery, police linked the suspect to a series of disappearances near rest areas across state lines. He traveled frequently for work. Each disappearance lined up with his schedule. He chose places where people were already vulnerable, already stressed, already eager to accept help. Perhaps the most unsettling detail came from his interview with investigators. He said he never forced anyone. He waited for them to trust him. He relied on exhaustion, isolation, and the belief that help is always safe. Another connected case uncovered during the investigation involved a man who worked overnight at a train station. He assisted travelers, answered questions, and helped carry luggage. Several passengers reported missing bags or delayed arrivals, but nothing serious, until a missing person case traced back to the station. Surveillance footage showed the employee guiding the victim into a restricted area under the guise of helping them. In both cases, the common thread was access paired with authority. A uniform, a role, a reason to be trusted. These crimes didn't happen in dark alleys or abandoned buildings. They happened in moments of vulnerability, on roadsides, in transit spaces, in the brief pauses between destinations. One investigator later described the danger as quiet and patient. It didn't chase. It waited. It depended on routine and assumption, on the idea that bad things happen somewhere else. True crime reminds us that safety isn't just about where we are, but how aware we remain. That listening to discomfort can matter more than politeness. And that help should never come at the cost of instinct. Thank you for listening. If you're still here, let me know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more true crime stories for sleep, based on real events and told calmly, slowly, and without interruption. Sleep well tonight, and stay aware.